I'd really love to get you all making ideally more than one contribution to the LangChain library. So this is actually a good time for it. We're kind of lucky, I think, in a way, because the commit that I ended up making, um, you can kind of see it's not that bad, and there's actually a lot of. Let me see if I can find the issue. Not that one. There's a lot of it's actually like a multi-part. I'll just show it to you in a second, but it's like a multi-part issue where like I made one contribution to it, but really like 20 different ones can be made, so that you guys can make similar contributions. It seems like. So just to show you kind of, I'm kind of skipping ahead for a second here just to show you that I think this is possible. But we'll take this like step by step by step. All right. So this is kind of the issue that I made a contribution to, which is basically that it says there are discrepancies in the init arguments for different models. In the init arguments basically means like of different models that use the same set of parameters. It'll be better UX. He means like by UX he means in this case like developers. Like it'll be a better experience for the developers if we could be using the same parameters. If we could be basically using the same set of parameters, and he wants people to use these kinds. So in other words, when we create these different objects, they should have these names. That's basically it, like model, API, key, temperature, and not other kind of ones like model name, etc. So the way that this kind of works is that eventually we'll see if you go to the LangChain library, there's this section called community. And then in LangChain community, there's these different libraries, right? Like lots of times they could be different LLM models. They could also be like different like chat interfaces. But the issue that he's raising is that if you look at these, I think this isn't a good example. You see Azure OpenAI. This has the word model version, right? It should be model. Okay? So we want to, I think this might be another example. It says OpenAI API type. We want to be using, right? Like if we see the key name and it's something else, it should instead be API key. Okay? Now so it's fairly like cosmetic almost change, but even making a change like that, when you're working with a large code base, takes some time, takes pretty careful kind of like consideration, because we'll have to make sure we're not affecting other parts of the code. We have corresponding tests for it. We are doing the right things in Git, making all that stuff, right? So that's kind of why I think this is it's fairly like surface level, but at the same time, we're going to talk about this through 10 different lessons just to make sure we do everything properly. But what's nice about it is what he's kind of saying is, we need to do this for all, you can make a contribution just doing it for one of them, but ultimately this story is to make the contribution for each one of them. So like one person can do one of these, a different person can do another one, things like that. Or you can work in pairs and do this as well. All right. MLflow. Some of these are things, Olama, right? Some of these are things I think I did it for Perplexity or I did for Vertex. So, and another thing that's nice that I found, if you try these different open source libraries, actually like a big factor isn't like the complexity of the code, like that stuff is difficult as it is, but then just making sure that that they're actually responsive. Like when you open a pull request, that there's actually a chance that they'll look at it and review it. And in my case, they looked at it within like an hour and then, gave me some feedback on it immediately and then ultimately merged it in within like 3 hours. So that was really nice. Like that you can kind of only discover, I think, by like trying it out or really looking into something. So in those cases, in kind of these, like if I think about like the check marks of like, can we actually make contributions? This checked a lot of boxes. Okay. And the other thing that's really nice with or you want to think about when you're making open source contributions, especially for we're doing it for the purpose of kind of building our resume as well as getting skills, is is it kind of like a popular or growing library? And obviously LangChain is. This is a library that a lot of people have heard about. They may or may not have a chance to explore it, but it's like a new and growing library. So that's really nice too. All right, so let me show you. So we'll get into this, in a few lessons, but let me show you kind of how I would get started with exploring, seeing if I can make even open source contributions in the first place. So the first thing is, right, we will go to obviously the LangChain repo, right? And, you can start reading through this. One thing I'll tell you is I don't know too much about how to use LangChain. I know a little bit about it, but that's actually not, and sometimes it can help, it certainly can help, but it's not a prerequisite to making contributions. We're really relying our Python and SQL knowledge to make contributions and just figuring out how code works. So I think that you'll kind of see I try to take an approach that's pretty directed at how can I achieve this goal. I try to pay attention to things along the way. It's kind of walking into a new city or a new place. You're not just steadfast walking in your destination ideally, but you want to learn things along the way. That way you kind of get oriented. But at the same time, I'm always trying not to veer too far off, right? I wouldn't try to spend more than 20 minutes on something tangential. We kind of all know this. LangChain is basically an alternative to Llama Index. It tells me a little bit about we'll see in the future, this is kind of the ways that it's been organized. What I was just showing you was part of the LangChain community part, right, where it integrates with Ollama and the OpenAI and those other libraries. What I'm really looking for is this kind of thing, or not how I can build with it, but how can I make contributions. So this is how I can actually use LangChain, but I want to see how can I make contributions with LangChain. And the documentation is of course useful, but here's contributing, right? So as an open source project, we're extremely open to contributions or better documentation. For more detailed information, see here. So let's click here. See, I already opened it. And this of course is going to be pretty useful. We want to look along the side here. Welcome the repository structure, contribute code, testing, contribute integrations, whatever that means, frequently asked questions, and then a link to the documentation. So it tells us, okay, they have these GitHub issues. This is interesting. Actually, if you start working on an issue, please assign it to yourself, right? So this is pretty useful because this way multiple people won't be working on the same thing. So that's pretty nice. If you're adding an issue, please keep it focused on single modular improvement. And then we have a GitHub discussion pages where users can ask questions, discuss design decisions, propose new features. So that's interesting too, right? If you want to get feedback or discuss certain things, we can check out this discussion issues. The other thing is this is pretty nice. Our goal is to have the simplest developer setup possible. Should you experience any difficulties, contact a maintainer. And like I said, with this repository, they have been pretty I'd say very responsive in my experience. So we want to help you get it unblocked, etc. And we want to credit you if it made it onto release. So that's cool. The repository structure, this of course is pretty good to look at. I would say this is more something I would come back to, as I feel myself confused. It's basically I'm using this as these are resources. I'm filing this away of okay, I'll come back to this and look at look at this information if I need to. It has these files, this pyproject.toml. This is kind of similar to a requirements.txt file. Makefile will look into this in the future. There's documentation, the docs directory for actually LangChain, and then the libs directory for the various LangChain packages. and then we can see like contributing code. So it tells that this we're gonna have to pay attention to, right? Because it's like, how do we actually make a contribution? So like, what is the workflow for it? So it's like make a fork and then pull request. Don't push directly to the repository. We'll get into that. We need to pass like formatting, linting. Linting is like style, right? Like for example, how long can the lines be in your code? Like that is something people will pay attention to. Fortunately, they have libraries that will automatically style it for you, but you have to run the right commands to style it. Similar to like running PyTest, right? And PyTest runs tests. You can run different libraries and it will either tell you the issues with styling or it will literally fix it for you. Okay? So kind of here you can see it gives us a link, see testing, formatting, and linting to see how to run these checks locally. Add a relevant unit test. I can just tell you in general, like having worked or like worked side by side, some people who have maintained popular open source libraries, a main part that they're looking at, like to see is this a legitimate contribution, is are there a good amount of tests? Meaning like you can, like if you have like 2 tests for like every kind of like a test for every if else statement, basically like 2 tests you can think of for like each method. It could even be more than that depending on how complicated the method is, but even like a 3 to 5 line let method, you might think that maybe there's like 2 tests that can go along with it. Oftentimes there's 3 times as many lines of testing as there are code in a contribution. So, but we'll get into that. Make an improvement, add a feature. And then this is very, very useful. We'll definitely be using this. Quick start. Okay, how to run the repository locally. For development containers, see the dev container folder. So we'll definitely get into that. And then it says like they use Poetry, which is kind of like very similar to like our Web3, install requirements.txt. They use this other tool called Poetry that tells how to install it. And then again, they get into the same kind of the way it's organized. And then they start to get us like this is all about like how do we actually set up the repository locally. All right, so we'll get into this. A nice thing about LangChain is they put in a good amount of work of making it. This is a fairly complicated library, but they put in a good amount of work to allow developers to set it up without too much pain, which is nice. All right, so this is kind of what I did. Like I literally, when I went through the repo, I just took notes on everything I did, and this is literally what I did. I kind of like looked through the README. I was scanning for contributions, like how do I contribute? Then I clicked here. I want to like pay attention along the side and like, okay, this is like my quick start. When I eventually want to actually get started, I need to do that. It tells me how to make, it tells me up here, how do I make contributions? What is the workflow? I haven't looked at this yet. Make sure there are a few different places. You can contribute integrations. So this is like new features. And this is also, you can see like contribute integrations with other libraries. So eventually this could be interesting for our stuff. We might want to look into it if we eventually get onto it. You can see it tells us about this base chat model and then these different integrations like inherit from that. So that's kind of interesting to look at if it's ultimately will be relevant to us. The next thing, so once you kind of like get a little bit oriented, the next thing I would do is like try to look for see if there are bugs that we can actually fix or seem fixable. So for that, right, you can click on issues. Now this can be like overwhelming because this actually is not so bad, right? 888 issues. If you look through the pull requests, you can see these are still in, like the ones that have not been accepted yet are, they're fairly recent, right? Which is kind of good. They also, some of these also just don't have a pass in our GitHub Actions yet. So like one thing I'm looking at too in these things is like, how, again, like how quick, trying to get a sense of like how quickly are they accepting pull requests. I also just know, it seems like from my own experience and following up on certain issues, that they are pretty responsive, but this is a pretty good signal. Is like, look at the issues, look at number of pull requests. If they have like thousands and it seems like they're not closed for any good reason, and nobody's paying attention to your pull requests, right? That's not like that would be like, I would want to look into that and see if it's worth submitting one. But in this case, it's pretty good. All right, so we click on issues. This is good. We want open issues, meaning that we can actually work on them. The next thing I want to do is actually a lot of open source libraries will have labels on it, and what we're looking for, one thing you could do is try to tackle something high priority, then something breaking, right? Like these are all kind of things that you would think would get accepted. For me, I'm looking for what's called a good first issue, right? Also, help wanted is good, right? Because it means like not necessarily just their in-house people are going to be working on this, but they want, outside contributors working on it. But for us, we can click on good first issue. And this is nice. Sometimes when you click on good first issue with open source libraries, there's nothing there, right? Which is like, how do I get started? And then from here, you can kind of see, we can kind of talk a little bit about this. It's like, how do you identify a good issue? So again, like I think I can kind of help you with it. Like I've identified how to make contributions to that one issue, but like in the future, this is something to look at. For me, like docs are certainly very useful to do, but like to just prove it to myself, I probably want to add some code too. So just let's click on these, and you can see I'm just pressing Command click to open a new tab. Here's the bug. All right, and this is just the intro. So there's really only 3 at this point that we can like click through. Oh, really? That's kind of cool. So Eric ran into this, that there wasn't actually too much documentation for core runnable methods. And that's fair. Like can be a good thing to do because it forces you to learn about the library. So like totally valid to do that. Eventually, I also would want you like trying to make code contributions, but like this can build some skills and also certainly helps people a lot. Okay. So the first thing I'll do, just want to show you at this point, like how I would try to identify if this is an issue I can get started on. For me, I'm looking to make sure, like, is this kind of clear? Does it seem not too difficult? Which you're making guesses along the way. Like you're never sure. You're just always just making guesses. So expand the Docker Compose with common dependencies used in integration tests. Interesting. So it basically, what I think they're saying here is like, can we set up the Docker Compose, right? Is all about my environmental setup. And it seems, common dependencies, so that seems to be talking about that too, used in integration tests. So like, if you think about integration tests, they test kind of end-to-end features. So it could be that like, hey, there are some dependencies like maybe database storage. Remember with like Llama Index, right? There's these different databases like vector databases that Llama Index can play with. Maybe they're saying, hey, we might as well install some of these, so that we can really test things more end to end. I'm not sure yet. So update the Docker Compose file here. That's pretty nice. They give us a link to it. By the way, this issue is also raised by this guy who's like a maintainer you might have seen his photo through these various issues. So that's pretty nice too, right? Because it means like this is something he wants done, right? That the community really wants done. Okay, so update the Docker Compose file here to include a database, so it is like that, to include a database that is used during integration tests and can be spun up locally via Docker Compose. Use a non-standard port, right? So this is pretty specific too. That's pretty nice. Update any integration tests that use the given service to match the port. Consider Git grepping. So he was really trying to help tell us how to do this. The other thing, I think this is possible to work on. I wish he would, if there's one thing that would help, maybe I would ask him, like, can you give me an example of some, like, some of these that we can use? But also, it's fairly open-ended, and you can see the contributions that people are using. added GraphDB in Docker Compose, added this guy. So one thing that's very nice about this actually would be a pretty nice issue, because one thing that we can do with this is we can actually click through these and see how they made the contributions, right? And then we can do something similar, possibly, right? So one, I can get a sense of how hard was it. So it's fairly hard, like, compared to what I did, where I changed like 3 files. They're changing 5, but you can see they're like changing the Docker Compose. They're this kind, right? They're like installing GraphDB, right? They're mapping the ports. They're, I guess, updating the Docker file. Maybe this Docker file is local. I'm not sure. And then here, same thing. I guess some more. I'm not sure about this. The GraphDB. I'd have to look at this. What this means. It seems like kind of some configuration for GraphDB, but like I said, I know as little as you do about it. And then here's a bash, some sort of bash file, I guess they're using, that will boot up GraphDB. And then I'm looking to see if that's really it, And then they're including different files, maybe in this make file, about then how to start up Docker Compose with GraphDB. So you can kind of get a sense of what is the work that's kind of required here. And then what I want to do is see if there's 2 different contributions. I want to see if this one's similar. Because if it is, then I can really start to feel like here's like a checklist of things that I need to consider, right? Like, what do I specifically need to do? So we saw what this guy did, right? And it was accepted. And then here's the other person. And same thing, we can look at the files change, which is fewer in this case, which is promising. So same thing, right? He goes to Docker Compose. We add now the image for this, maps the port, and then that's it. And then he just changes the test. So this is fairly simple. Again, like, it probably takes hours of work to make sure everything's working, figure out how to do everything, but in terms of ultimately the amount of things he needed to change, it's kind of like a proxy for how much work this probably took. So maybe this would take like 4 hours, something like that, which should give you an idea of how kind of deliberately you want to move through these things. All right, cool. So this is, if you're kind of reading through an issue, what I'm looking for is, one, can I even understand what they're saying? You can see there's other things, which is, like sometimes they'll give you examples, like the issue raiser will give you examples as to where the bug is and how to fix it. So you can look at that too. Let me see if there's other questions. So the DBs to be added here are on test integration tests. I think what they're saying is, in this issue, is like, allow me to use Docker Compose to boot up these these different databases that play with. Let's take a look at this.
Yeah, just regarding the databases, the 2 peers you showed, my understanding, at least for the one where only 2 files have been changed, is the integration test already existed, and based on that, we added those container images to the Docker Compose file.
Yeah, that's true. So you'll see different like integration tests. The way I know this because I played around with this library. Those integration tests don't run by default. So basically what they're saying is, so they don't. If you just run like basically PyTest, those integration tests on purpose don't run because they want to make it easy to kind of like run all the tests, and maybe you don't want to hook into those different databases. And now they're kind of saying, for a feature, let's see if we can make it easier for someone to use these databases. So that's why it's like Docker Compose, use the GraphDB database, or like boot it up with that, either by default or with give yourself an option to do that. So you can kind of see that here this builds the graph DB. This seems right, Docker build, and then a path to probably where the Docker file lives. Right. It's interesting. Like I would want to play. I don't know enough about. Like I would want to play around with it more. The other thing you can see when you're looking at it is like these are the files, but it's also nice to see it over. Kind of see the different file tree to see what they changed this way too. All right. So you can see in this GraphDB library they changed the Docker file, this configuration file, and it seems like maybe a way to create a database as well as then this make file, right? And then which is down here. So it's like, all right, I'm like, again, like I'm not ready yet to start contributing, but I'm starting to just get a sense of like a little bit of what's involved. Then of course, then I kind of, as I mentioned, maybe you would click to the next one, see something similar. So they changed the Docker. This feels like in the same, I think this is the same file they changed. And then actually they just looked at the tests. And this is kind of giving you an idea because this maybe is telling me of like what to change, because I can go to maybe libs, community tests, integration tests, and then look through to see what other databases kind of like haven't been integrated yet in this Docker Compose file, right? If I want to see ways that I can contribute. All right. I wanted to show you one other issue. I have it in the lesson. I think it's here. Yeah, this is it. This is pretty good, and this one hasn't been fixed yet, but I think this one's pretty good. So one, we can see this guy is a GitHub contributor. So again, another good sign, just that like, maybe we can, that this is a valid issue that's probably being raised here. He says when using Chroma, so this is a vector database, I believe. Vector stores newly created with from text. Do not delete previous documents. So the vector stores newly created from text do not delete previous documents. So think about what this means. We kind of saw this with Llama Index. It probably is. Remember, you can do when you're like from documents, right? Like you can like with Llama Index, you can create your set of documents or nodes and then place them in the database. My guess is this is doing something similar, but when we do this, maybe if we already have this database or something like that, he expects it would kind of reinitialize the database, but with Chroma it doesn't do that. And then he gives an example. This is what I wanted to show you. This is very nice. So it kind of shows you how you can reproduce the issue. All right, and this is very useful with fixing a bug, because this is really the first step. Is like validate it yourself. Right, reproduce the issue they're describing so that you can get a good sense of what's going wrong and then start to debug it, right? So what he's showing here is he's showing with this other library, with this other vector store, Vice, with I think it's like Facebook's version, that is each vector store is newly created from text and has 0 documents. So let me see if there's here's the from text. He passes through the text, and I guess some sort of embeddings, some fake embeddings. So remember that would be like probably our like the vectors themselves. And then here I'm guessing is like some sort of documents or actual text. And then he calls, this is the make vector store, right? So he's just wrapping this process in this function right here. And then when he calls it, it just has these 3. Right, so there's nothing new resulting here. He does ABC, there's ABC, then he calls this from text again, and there's DEF. So so I think what he's showing is this works properly in the sense that we don't, right here, when we recreate it, we don't also have ABC along with DEF, right? It's started fresh. When doing Chroma, right, he's also using the from text, and look, here's the bug. So he does ABC, it gets ABC, but once he adds DEF, then we get ABC, DEF, right? So this is I think this is a great example, right? Like he's showing, here's where it works, Here's where it doesn't work. I should be able to reproduce this. Like that'll be my first step. You'd want to translate this into a test and then dig away to start to figure out what's going wrong. The other thing that they do is then you can like scroll down, and this person, Andres, is like explaining how he thinks. I believe the issue is that in Chroma the collections have the same default name and therefore you get the existing collection. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like I don't totally understand this yet, but I like the fact that there's like this conversation back and forth that it feels like they are like pointing me in the right direction, and then I want to pull on that thread. And maybe they're wrong, like like they are doing some initial research, but at least they're probably showing me a lot of like, okay, I should be looking at this file, I should be looking at this file. Like they're doing the right thing. He's comparing Chroma versus Vice, right? Like that's pretty smart. That's what maybe I would want to be doing. So that's pretty useful, right? Like what we're kind of learning is like, okay, when we're trying to figure out a good issue, one, it's fairly good description. Seems like something I can, at least understand. Two, he's pretty explicitly telling me how I can see and reproduce the issue, which is great because this is something this is like one of my first steps is to reproduce the issue. And then three, then they're even telling me what they think is going wrong, and where to start looking. So this is something that like, I might try to fix this, like this week. It seems like it hasn't been fixed yet, and like, but they are making progress on it, which is pretty nice. Okay. So this is how, the point is like, when you're going through these different issues, a big deal is choosing the right one, right? Because you're going to spend like multiple days on it, and you're just getting started, you want to choose something that's, you don't want to spend multiple days and then not be able to fix it. Like that's going to happen probably, but it's worth putting in some time just to understand it. And so what I would do is literally, there's only 5 of them. I would literally click through each one and see like, which one seems like the easiest to fix. All right. And all of them, you can see, here's our favorite guy, Yurtsev. He's raising all of them, right? Which is pretty nice. It means like, if we do it properly, he's going to accept the pull request, and he'll probably also respond to questions that we have too, which is good. This I'm maybe concerned about with, right? It says stale. I don't know. So this one I would just pay attention to as to whether or not we really want to fix it, or it's still an issue. So maybe we'd ask him first, something like that. And you can just ask him by probably after you look into it, then you can add a discussion here, right? You can add a comment and tag him. All right. Cool. So that was the first few things. Is like getting oriented, vetting an issue. You can see I talk about like looking at priors. That's what we did with this Docker Compose part. Was we tried to see like what are similar contributions that people made, right? That we can then look into. The other thing you can do, so right, we did that with. I want to look at the good first issues. We did that with this Docker Compose thing, right? We were able just to look at different pull requests. Notice this one's still open, so maybe he didn't. I don't know why this hasn't been closed yet, but this one was merged in there. It could be that this just isn't as popular a database that he wants, but these are priors. But that's what I mean by priors. Is like, and that's just my term. I don't know what people call it, but like similar contributions that we can then use to as a model for how to make the fix. So here in this case, we can see them directly on the issue. In other cases, let's say people did not make pull requests related to the issues, which probably in most cases they won't. The other thing you can do is click on, let's say there's an issue with Docker Compose. I would click on go to the issues. I want to look at issues that are closed that deal with Docker Compose. Okay? And then press return here. And then I probably want to get, you can get more specific than that, but here I can then start to click through and find issues and then see how do they fix it. So I'm trying to learn from other people's examples of how do they fix this part of the code base and what should I look at, right? So maybe this is relevant because it's an issue with Redis. I'm not sure, you know what I mean? Normally my search might be a little more detailed, but this is a good step because how the hell do I get started with this thing? Well, look to see what people previously did, and then click through and then take a look at their code. All right. So again, I have an issue I think for you, at least for a lot of you to get started with. But I do want to give you that way of how do you go from, opening up GitHub with a totally new open source library to then, reading through some of the documentation but not getting bogged down, finding some issues that look like you should get started with, right? And then kind of seeing past examples. And then the next thing we'll do, which I'll help you with, but I'll also deploy here, is in setting up the environment. So what I mean by that is if you go to my VS Code, you can see I have this installed. And I can start, ideally, running the tests. And all the dependencies are set up. How do we do that with this library? Okay, so that's the next thing that we'll talk about. Anything, I'll let you guys do the readings and then try to get started with the environmental setup. But anything, any questions or things to follow up on before then?
Do you have a opinion on fixing issues or just making contributions? What happens if there's a way you think you can make the library better? Adding something, a new feature.
It's possible, right? You want to first kind of propose it, see see if it's something that you can, so you can raise an issue about kind of a feature request, and then maybe tag one of the maintainers to see if that's something that he thinks is worthy. I personally think it's harder as a first issue, because it's I kind of know the structure when there's a bug. It's reproduce the bug, fix the bug, right? Write the test, reproduce the issue, translate that reproduction of the issue into a test, and then when the test goes green, I'm basically done, right? I want to make sure there's no other, similar types of things I didn't miss, right? There's other parts of the code base that still work, or that I fixed this everywhere, got to the root cause, but it gives me some structure. Where with a feature, right, I'm also have to define kind of that this is useful and that it's wanted and that then I'm doing it in the right way. So it's just more challenging to do a feature in my view. So that's why I would do that later on. Maybe I would do a couple bug fixes first, and then try to do a feature.
Okay, and I'm also wondering in, I guess, regards to a company looking at your resume, do you think one's more impressive than the other, or as long as they see you making content of any sort, it's going to catch their attention?
I think that one feature could be more impressive, but it also if you say, if it's hey, I fixed various bugs, you fixed 3 bugs, that's pretty good, if it's a legit feature, yeah, that could be pretty cool for some people to see, but it's a little, I think the way to do it is still in steps, still, because it's risky, right? You don't want to do something work on something for a month and then all of a sudden it's nowhere close. So what I would just be careful about doing is raise an issue, that hopefully still chunks it down to a day, 2 days worth of work. Try to, push pretty often and get some feedback on it to make sure that this is something they want and that will be accepted.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think that the truth is they're both, just making a contribution is great. If you're able to do add a feature, that's all, I think, yes, I do think that's probably more impressive in most cases. That's nice. Cool. Other things? Anything else? Okay. The other thing is like a big challenge is just getting familiar with the code base. That's what's nice about bugs too is like you're not really like adding a new file so much or like adding a lot of new lines of code because you want those not only those lines of codes to work but also that like they're in the right place. So if this method is written wrong, I'm not changing oftentimes the location of the method. I just have to fix it internally, which is nice. Like I don't have to like I'm not yet familiar with the code base to know exactly where everything should go. So that's why it's like in getting oriented with the code base too, like fixing bugs can be a good way to get started. Cool. All right, so yeah, I'll put you into breakout rooms. Have it installed, but I think that I can kind of go through all the steps. So the first thing is in this contribute code, it kind of gives you kind of like an overview as to the workflow, right? And then it gives you a quick start, right? It says a quick start, how to run the repository locally. For development container, use the .dev container folder. So this should be easiest, using this development container. But if it doesn't work for you, then you can try to install it manually. And it says like, hey, it does require this thing Poetry. So maybe if you end up having an issue with Poetry, maybe just first trying to get Poetry installed locally on your computer to see if you can debug that. Maybe that's a technique. For me, okay, how to run the repository locally? Let's do the development container. So see the .dev container folder. And then here there's, it gives you kind of some intro as to how to use this. So one, if all else fails, you should be able to use GitHub code spaces. So let me perhaps show you how you can do that. The first thing we want to do is probably fork this repository. So in other words, like we're going to be making contributions. Our workflow isn't going to be to push up code directly to LangChains, but rather, if we click on fork, then we can make our own copy of it. It seems like I can do this. All right, and you can see that it's creating a copy of this here. All right, so it's basically moving over all the code, and now, Jigsaw Lab Students has its own version, and then it also is pointing to like the LangChain library, which is really nice because if somebody makes a contribution here, then I can click on sync fork and it will pull over the code from LangChain's version of this onto mine. Okay, so we obviously right now we're up to date, but I can always do that, which is pretty good. Next thing, so if we go back to this to the dev container, then at this point, like we could probably, for my forked version, like I said, if all else fails, you should be able to go to dev container and then click on open in GitHub code spaces, and then you can see like it's going to create basically like connect to an EC2 machine or some sort of equivalent, and then we can work inside of here, like kind of like work inside of your browser and give you a VS Code inside of here. This is, I just find it clunky to do, but if this is what works, it's okay. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing wrong with it. But okay, for right now, what we can do is probably I can go to that Jigsaw Labs student version where LangChain is. Yeah, so this is my Jigsaw Lab student LangChain. Here's my dev container. And the other way of doing this is to use this VS Code containers, right? So you can see we're building up in this code space, but ideally we can work with VS Dev containers. If you click, it will open for my main repo, not the LangChain. We want to use my forked version. So at this point, it talks about having a locally cloned repo, but you shouldn't actually need it. What you do need is a forked version. So what we can do is just take this URL pasted it here, and I just want to change my username to be the one pointing to my forked version. So that would be Jigsaw Lab Students LangChain. So if I put that here, okay, and I recommend, you can put this in a Word document first, just to make sure you have it correct. And then I press return. You can see it's going to open this up. One step I probably skipped that you'll need to do is in VS Code, you'll have to install the dev container extension. See, I forget. Does it tell you how to do that? But it's not so bad. I think it's either here or there. It's probably the VS Code dev containers extension. So like you may have to just go to that link, click install first, all right, and make sure that's installed. At this point, I can just plug in the URL, allow dev containers extension to open the URI, and then you can see it's opening this up. It should download the repo. So this should be my forked version of the repo. And then you can see it's doing this starting dev container show log. Right? And you can see what it's doing, right? It's pulling down the related image, blah, blah. How is this working? Right? If you look at the .dev container file, you can see that it's basically just running docker compose.yaml. My guess is by default it's like bind mounting, so that when you make code, a code change in VS Code, that's automatically going to have the update inside of the relevant container. Here it's specifying the workspace folder. This is like what VS Code will open up into when you get started. That's basically it. Like, look, this thing's like 4 lines, right? And then if you look at the Docker Compose file, you can see what that's doing, right? Where here, that is, right, it's saying whenever you want VS Code to mount the folder of your project. So this is the LangChain inside the image, right, in this dev Docker file. And then it's going to take what you make changes to and bind mount it to here. So if you wanted to reproduce this, I mean, you probably could also just do Docker Compose up. And it's going to boot up this dev.docker file. And then I guess it doesn't want to bind mount the ports for Mongo or things like that anymore. And it's creating a network for you. That's basically it. So it's really all it's doing is just running the Docker file, and then, like we said, like bind mounting any code changes. That's into the Docker image. Okay, that way you can have your live updates. If we look back at this, I mean, it's still working. I don't think we're done yet. Okay, so now run in container connection established. But you can see that it is starting at least to clone this down. All right, and then the next thing we can do, once we've kind of opened this up with the dev container, so all I did so far really was just fork the repository. So I have this Jigsaw Lab student, and then I copied this URL and then changed it so that it uses Jigsaw Lab student, and that, right, you would use your own username and the forked version of it. And like I said, if this doesn't work, then eventually this code, here it is. You can always just click on the open in code spaces, and then here you can see it's doing the same thing remotely, and it works fine. So you can just develop code here. If you look at the remote, this maybe you change. This is the only thing I would do, is change this. So the issue you can see here, maybe I can make this bigger, is that if I push up a change, right, it's going to be pushing up to LangChain's version, which I don't want. But I can, like, say I want to make a fix on a feature. I'll create a new branch, right? Fix feature. And then get branch -a. Here I'm on that branch. I press Q to get out of it, press Command K to clear my screen. And And then you can just, and then what I'd want to do is, again, just change this remote is the main thing. And the way I can do that is, I want to go to GitHub Jigsaw Lang Student, LangChain. I don't know if I have, yeah, so LangChain. And I just want to set the remote to this. So it's just git remote set URL allow to paste. It's asking me, can I paste this? It's a little, I'll have to get the remote, I think it's origin set URL. And then it's just, does it give me this? Yeah, and it's just this. So this will just change the remote from LangChain AI to my version. I can't, oops, I need to do a git remote set URL origin. Okay, so that worked. And now if I look at git remote -v, you can see that here is, this is origin now. So what does that mean? If I like make a change, okay, and then git add all, git commit -m, fix greeting. So you cannot, would you, if to obtain right access, we'll point this code space to your fork. Yes, that's fine. So type Y, that's right. So basically what they're saying is here is like, they're saying, hey, you can't push up to LangChain, the original, but we can point this at your fork and create it if it doesn't exist. Are you okay with that? So I said fine, right? And then I just wonder if they actually git remote -v here. Yeah, and I want to push to this anyway. So maybe I can do that. Git push origin to fix feature. Right, and that pushed it. Okay, so pushed it to Jigsaw Lab student, LangChain. I now should have a branch. Here it is, fix feature. Okay, and you can just eventually make a pull request to LangChain's library. So if all else fails, the point is we kind of have a solution where we can just fork this and then click on open in GitHub code spaces. And then, all I did from there was just check to see the remote, git remote -v. So I think originally said this, and I'm like, I don't want to push directly to here. So then I just changed, I did git remote set URL origin, and then I found my forked version, this guy, and pasted this in here. Right, and that was good enough, right? And then I can make sure I'm on a new branch, and then push up that branch. All right, so this should work fine. It's actually not. Now that I'm actually interacting with it, it doesn't seem like the worst coding experience either. It seems not bad. All right. For working with it locally, you can see that all I did was I just basically did what the instruction said, was to plug this in there. I also installed the extension, right? And then I plugged the URL in there with my username and the repo. And then from there, it's booting up a container, right? We saw that it's gonna like bind mount my code inside of it. We can create so I just clicked on this to create a new terminal. You can see it took me, I guess, inside my current branch, but I don't have to be there. Let's just check it out. Okay, so once this thing boots up, it will take you inside of master. And what you'll want to do, you don't need to create a new branch at this time, but what you do want to perform is you basically want to get to the the libs community. Just give me 1 second. So what you do want to do is it's basically just follow along with the documentation. So if we keep going down here, it says, what should we do? Start with the LangChain community. Good, because that's what we want to start with anyway. So go to CD community. So go here. I'll CD into libs community. That's right here, libs community. Now I type ls, and we can see that they have this in libs community. There's a couple of things, but they have this pyproject.toml, and that's what is like listing all the Python libraries, I believe, that we're going to be needing for this part, right? So everything's kind of independent in this code base. So this has its own like kind of like dependency file that we would use. And the way that we then use it is to do probably this line. I think you can just run poetry install, but we can do this. So it's installing dependencies from the lock file that's right here, I'm guessing, right? And now I guess this is even more specific. This may take a second. The other thing that you can kind of get familiar with is this make file. So right, like the next thing it tells us to do is to then verify everything works, because it's not, things aren't gonna, like you're not gonna be able to run the tests unless you've installed the required dependencies. So the next thing it tells us to do is to run make tests. But the thing to realize about this, I don't think I need this, is that this make file is right here, you know? And what does it do? If you run something like make test, it's going to run this underneath, right? And I'm guessing this is, you do like make test and then some file, and that does that. So the point is, like, what I've encountered when working with this is that for whatever reason, sometimes it, like this make command didn't work, but I could then just look to see what was the command it's really calling and call it directly, and that worked fine, you know? So it's like this make file is just showing you, for me, the way I'm using is it's showing me some, you know, shell commands I'm gonna potentially want to use to get started, right? Like what are the common commands I'm gonna want to use, right? Like here's how I run PyTest with poetry, right? I didn't know that before looking at this file, okay? And then here it says extended test, so maybe this is something I would look, I don't know what this means, but maybe this is something I would look into. Other things here is like the lint, right? Remember that after you make a commit, sorry about that, after you make a commit, you're going to want to probably make sure you format and lint it. So now we're back to that same, like what does this do? Make format. So you can look for it, just press Command F, look for the word format. And then here you can see it. So it does this poetry run rough format. What does this do? We can ask ChatGPT, we can Google what rough is, right? Rough is this like formatting library. Yeah, Kyle, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry if you were going to answer this already, but I'm unfamiliar with make or the make file. I don't know if this is the right way to use poetry, but on one project I used it to set up the virtual environment, and then from there I just used it like a normal Python project, like .env, and it saved my butt. But so poetry is cool, but I wasn't sure if could run into issues with that.
Well, I mean, for here, you probably don't have to create like a separate virtual environment. It seems like that's probably installed for you. I haven't explored poetry really, other than through this, so you probably know more about it than I do. But it feels to me like it's kind of like what you're saying, like it's just a Python package manager. And then this starts to feel similar, right? With some of you all, we did something like Python 3-m PyTest to make sure that we're running the PyTest module with Python 3. Here we're like saying, okay, in the context of maybe a poetry environment, I'm not sure, or some sort of poetry packages first, then run rough, you know. And if you're not,
It has a dependency resolver too. So like when I was trying to create an environment for an open source project, I kept trying to build the .them and it kept breaking over and over again. And then once I used the poetry setup, it like systematically goes through and figures out what all the packages are and what all works. And then from there, everything just worked.
yeah, so that's kind of like what's going.
Resolver.
So that's pretty nice, right? Like this should be able to be the same exact setup because it's in a Docker container. That's my guess, and that's probably what this poetry.lock file is doing, is like specifying, hey, these are the exact kind of libraries that you should be using to play nicely with each other. All right, so where we are in terms of the make file is like it's just a shorthand for running these bash commands, you know. So it is basically doing that for you. So it's instead of me running, I could run poetry rough format, and then here it's probably like specify the Python files that I want to format. So I could do that, or I could just run make format, and then that will run that. That will just, what does that do? It looks for the command, and then it runs what's underneath. Okay. So let's see that. Like at this point, this feels. Let me see if I can. This feels booted up. I was gonna see if I can switch back over. So far, all I did was run that. Basically, run what it told me to do. Run this poetry install, and now it looks like this is done. And we want to confirm that by then running, so I'll just do Command F again, the word make test. You do test colon. It's not there. Maybe because I think all these point to the same command underneath. And you do make test. But one thing to notice is like, you know, this is a large code base. They're using some tools that I'm familiar with, some tools that I'm not. A big part of what I'm doing, it's kind of like when you first got started coding again. Like that's what feeling with a large code base, you know, it's kind of like, right? Like there are things that you're just unfamiliar with. So you want to use those kind of like beginner skill sets of like, what can I, you know, it's still just code, you know, like you're not changing their code. So you can just still like guess things. So it's like, all right, let's see you make test. Just plug it in. I got this error. I've always been getting this error where it says no module named Rapid Fuzz. How would we, like if you ran into this error with a lab, right, like what would you do? We've already tried to install things with poetry, like our requirements.txt. So the next thing we could do is probably just like pip3 install Rapid Fuzz. So just install the library. Like this is just, you know, what would this do? This is just for the purpose of my my development code anyway. So now I've installed it, and I'll just try to make tests. Now I got a little further, right? And you can see this is what it's running underneath. It's poetry running PyTest tests, unit tests, I guess. And I guess that's coming from here. Define a variable for the, right? Here's this test file, which is getting defined, and then down here I guess it's getting used, right? And again, I'm just guessing. Like, I mean, it's a little bit more than guessing, but I'm not sure. But you know that you kind of just move forward and try to, unless it's like giving you a problem or feels like something you really don't know, you kind of do this technique of exploring while still moving forward, and everything's passing, right? Which means I'm pretty much set up. Okay. And you can do the same thing in the code spaces, wherever it is here, you know. Just we're on the feature branch, make we want to cd into the right directory. So cd libs community. And then we'll just do whatever it's set to do, poetry install. I think it was a little more than that, but basically poetry install, installing the dependencies, and go for it, right? And then how do you know that it works successfully? Run make test. In my example, okay, so that was fast. Run make test. This is now running it again. And in this case, it seems like maybe we're getting further without. Yeah, so in this case, for whatever reason, I don't know why, it didn't run into that error of needing to install Rapid Fuzz. It's just running the tests. Okay, and if these are working, then you're successful. Notice, by the way, it says 625 pass. Some of the 358 are skipped. So if you look at these tests, so let's go back to the make file. That was in libs community. What it's running files here, so we can look at tests and then unit tests, and these are all the tests. And then some of these only aren't run by default, kind of like I said. Some of these are not run by default. You have to specify that you want to run them. So that's why a good amount of these are skipped, So it's just something for you to pay attention to. You'll encounter that. All right, so that's kind of, I don't know, at this point you're set up. If you're able to run the tests successfully for this part, then this component, this community component is set up, and that's what we'll be working with. All right, so it seems like you probably should be able to do it locally, but if you can't do it locally, at least you can make a fork and then use the code spaces option from there. From there, the next thing is, attempting, we can do that, is basically attempting a fix. I'll let you guys read through this, but it's going to be that technique. Here's the issue. We actually have a lot of kind of guidance because you can see how a lot of different people made contributions. And I personally clicked through every one of these, right? Because I wanted to see, I know that it takes a while. It's why did I do that? Well, I'm prepared for spending hours working on this. I want to make sure I'm not going down the wrong path. So I'm trying to just get a sense as to what everyone did. I took note of every, the types of files they changed in each one of these things. This guy changed 44 files. Probably didn't do it for all of them. But even as you look through them, this is documentation stuff. Here, I'm guessing he's changing, he's just changing a Jupyter notebook. He's just changing some documentation stuff. In terms of the code he's changing, let's kind of scroll down. So far, it's all just documentation. Here, finally, he's changing code. All right, so this is giving me a hint as all right, if he's changing for OpenAI, find it in maybe, I want to look at this folder, community, LangChain community might have something referencing, the library. I want to change. It seems like he's making changes for Neo4j, and I guess these might also be other templates that use OpenAI. So that might be why he's doing that. So that's one, and then the other ones are simpler than that. Here's Anthropic, right? So I'm going to look at this. Here, there's only 7 files changed. This is documentation. This is documentation. Right, certainly this is documentation. I want to look at that, but really, my first step is probably going to make some code fixes, and that's just 2 files. And I'm just paying attention. Okay, so there's this thing called libs partners that I want to look through, and then there's the unit tests, right? And so I can just go there and look at community, libs, partners. Right, and then he made a change here to Anthropic. Let's take another look. LangChain Anthropic chat models. LangChain Anthropic chat models. So I'm just trying to pay attention to, just get a sense of what change did he actually make here, and then we can kind of see it. So it's that same thing. We want to standardize it. So this is the API key. Let's take a look. So here, what did he do? You can start to see he kept this actually the same, and he added this thing to have this be referenced as API key. He didn't actually. It seems like we can still maybe use Anthropic API key, but he used this thing called field, which also gives me an alias to API key. So maybe like I can initialize this chat model using API key as well as Anthropic API key. Maybe that's what happened here. So this whole file, he changed 2 lines of code, right? 2 lines of code. And then here he did some refactoring, or he really just added this. He added this, He then tested, instead of just one model that he's testing with, he's now, let's read the tests, he's now saying, okay, I can initialize a model both with the model name and with model, right? So now I get to use just model and with API key and with Anthropic API key. And then he's confirming that down here that setting it using these different attributes still works. Okay, so you can, that gives me a pretty good sense of maybe what I'll have to do, right? And remember how that relates to what this person's asking for. He's saying we want to be able to initialize with model and API key. And then over here, now he's testing that he can initialize with model and API key. Sorry, model and API key. And then how did he fix that? Well, in the relevant file, he's adding this field thing, which gives aliases for API key. This actually doesn't make sense. Why didn't he write a test for timeout? He probably should have. Maybe we could add to that. All right. Cool. So that's what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to get a sense of read the changes and then try to make sense of the changes and see how do the changes fix the issue. And then now even though I haven't, I don't even know what library I'm about to do, I'm already getting a sense of what's the procedure here, And I did that with one, and then I can click through and go to the next one and see, okay, are there any curveballs, right? Or does this just reinforce my sense of what I'm going to have to do? And then you can Google stuff. It's well, he's using this field thing. What the heck is that? Well, field comes from LangChain Corp Pydantic V1. What's Pydantic V1 and field? It's just Google, right? A field, it's Pydantic. It's probably something like this, right? And then kind of see what this does. So it's just, my point is it's a bit of a craft, I guess, because you have to know when it's as you get closer to the problem, that's probably where you start paying even more attention and devote even more time towards doing some research. When I'm about to write code, I'm getting closer to there. That's when I'm okay, let me dig a little deeper on this. All right. As you're further away from the problem, you're still paying attention, but you're not quite sure if you need to use the information yet. At this point, I'm pretty close. I'm almost at a fix, so I want to do some Googling and pay a little more attention. So that's where we're kind of getting to, right? Is you'd want to do the environmental setup, you want to do attempting a fix, and then making a fix. And then eventually, right, then we have to go through some Git procedures. Questions about, I don't know, anything so far? So the hard part, you're going to open up the code, right? If you just scroll through, it's it's hard to understand. But the really hard part is what should you pay attention to? So that's why it's to not get overwhelmed, going back to these changes and seeing what did they change? What did they change? Cool, this is what they changed. Now if I'm going to change something, what should I do? I'm going to Command F, look for the word model. It did model : and that took me to the right part. Oh, okay, here's model. So this one, right, this one's been fixed. Alias to model name. Here's that max tokens, right? Here's the top page. So this whole file is probably 800 lines of code, but I just, I zoomed in on what I needed to pay attention to, right? By knowing that I'm going to need to change that model attribute. And so I'm just doing Command F, look for the word model. I put in the colon because there's too many models. It's a model, found it. And now I'm kind of zooming in again. All right. Cool. All right, let me, so far is I've just forked the repo into Jigsaw Lab Student. And let's say like VS Code isn't working for me. All right, we're gonna do a workaround. So what we can do is we can, I just have a folder here. I'm gonna clone down, right, my forked version, right? So this is why it says Jigsaw Lab Student. Clone this down, and then CD into this LangChain folder. Okay, so I've CD'd into the LangChain folder, and essentially, we're not going to see this .dev container because it's a dot folder, right? But we can still, but it's still there. If you do ls-a, there it is. So we can do cd.dev container, and just remember, like how this works, is that I'll do it here for a second. So I'm not using code spaces. All I did right now is I just cloned down the repo and I'm just pressing code dot. I'm just opening up the, the repository. But remember that in this dev container.json, the way that works is it runs this Docker Compose file. So maybe instead of, if we can't get this working, right, the dev container, maybe we can just run the Docker Compose file. Okay, so let's do that. So I'm going to cd into .dev container, and then if you look at the Docker Compose file, you can kind of see how it's working, right? It sets the context, so this is the build, and that from the parent directory, meaning from this LangChain directory, there's a file in libs LangChain dev.docker file. Libs LangChain, there, it should be down here. Dev.docker file. Right? So it's going to run this. And you can look at it too, right? And see how it's doing everything. So, all right, so we should be able to just maybe do Docker Compose up, and that will build this image, and then it will try to run, the corresponding container, and it will also notice this thing too. So what this is doing is basically bind mounting from this Docker Compose file, right, the parent directory, so that's this LangChain code base, into our Docker container, right, which I guess has as a workspace as a LangChain cached, right? So let's do that. I think I already have it built, but just remember, yeah, we can close this down. So I'm just going to do Docker Compose up. And this is building the container, attaching to it, and then it exits immediately, which is not helpful for us. So why does it exit immediately is because, well, remember, like with Docker, once the process is finished, it's gonna shut down. So we want to have this thing still running. Like we want to have this continually running. So what I asked ChatGPT, how do I fix this? And what it told me to do was basically insert a command that says keep running. So that's what this is. So I'm in LangChain, in this LangChain service, right? There's the build command, there's volumes, there's networks. I'm adding one at that same level. So I'm just tabbing in a little bit and then doing command tail-f dev null. So this is like tail this file and follow it. Like the -f means like follow. So keep listening. What this says is like keep listening to this file. Just stay listening, right? Kind of like with like Flask, we say keep listening for requests. Here we're just saying like keep listening for changes to this file. So this time now, if I do, and by the way, I put that full thing in here, right, with the tail-f. So now this time, if I go back and I do Docker Compose up, it's running and it should stay, we're not going to see it exit. It's continually running. Okay? So that's pretty nice because what that means is now I should be able to, right, like it's set up the dev container and it's gone through those steps. Oh, it's dev.dockerfile. So it's gone through all these steps, set up, blah, blah, installed Poetry for me, hopefully, things like that. And what I still need to do is go into this running container. So how do I do that? And maybe do the rest of the setup, right? Do the rest of the environmental setup. So how do I do that? You have to be in the same, remember, if I'm going to interact with Docker Compose, I have to be in the same folder, which I'm not. Maybe, hold on. So I'm going to cd into that .dev container, and there's my Docker Compose file. You have to be able to see this file, right, if you're going to interact with Docker Compose. So I'm going to do Docker Compose, PS, look for my running containers. This is it. Started about a minute ago. Here's my command that started it. And now I can do Docker Compose, and I want to sh, right? I want to bash into that container. So I can do Docker Compose exec -it. I always get confused. It's either the name of the container or the name of the service. I guess I'll start with the name of the container and do bash, and it doesn't like that. So I'll now move to the name of the service. It's just LangChain. And that works. Okay? So now I've bashed into this, and right, we have the rest of this, right, to set up this environment. So, for instance, I should probably be able to type Poetry, and it's breaking just because of the same error I always get about Rapid Fizz. But you can see Poetry's installed. All right? So now what's next? What's next is just to follow along. This is basically having your dev spaces installed, because for the terminal, I can just use I can just have that bashed into the container. This is my terminal. For the code base, you can still make changes throughout this code base. So just quickly, why will this work? Remember, we're bind mounting from the parent directory, so everything, the parent folder of this Docker Compose file, right, will be bind mounted into Workspace's LangChain cache. So that's why, I should be able to see all this, okay? And also why, if I go to, let's go to libs, community, and then here's the make file. Let's just print it out, right? It starts with this .phony. Let's go to there, libs, community. There's the make file. It starts with the .phony. Now let's just edit it. Hello world, right? And then re-display this. And there's the hello world, okay? So we're the same, this is the magic underneath of dev containers. We're just bind mounting the same way we always did. So any changes you make here will be, immediately here. So then what can you do? From here, you just follow along, essentially, with the contributing guide, where it tells you, what to do. We want to eventually get to this make test, but the first thing to do is to run this. So we go here, and we just do Poetry install, and it breaks for the same reason as always for me, and I install it, right? And then I'll run the rest. Installing the dependencies, now it's finally working. And then, so, it's actually more like my normal environment. I'm using my terminal, and I'm separately using this code, and anytime I make a change here, I should see it. And really the only way I'm interacting anyway to make sure things work is, I'm writing tests, things like that, right? So I'm going to write a test to make sure that my code actually works. So the last thing I'll do once this gets set up is just, we can go to basically this make file and then do make tests or do Poetry run PyTest, and that should run my tests. So basically we just did the long way around. So the steps that I did was, again, I went to find my Docker Compose.yaml file. To keep the container running, I added this line, right? Then I did Docker Compose up, that will build this Docker image that's specified here. Okay, and then it will also start up the container, keep it running because of this line, and then bind mount the code into this folder. And then from there, we need to exec into that running container. So to do that, I did, I'll just do it here. I have to go to my LangChain folder, and then go into .dev container, find my Docker Compose file, do Docker Compose PS to find my containers, and then I'll do Docker Compose exec -it, the name of the service, bash, and now I can bash into my environment, and the environment's almost set up. I guess I think I just, it might have ran out of space, I'm not sure. But I can at least read this error message and try to, it seems like everything else went fine, but I can at least maybe find this package. It seems like an issue with the response library URL at lib3, but this feels easier, at least for me, to be able to debug than the other things. So all I did at this point, right, was Docker Compose exec -it, LangChain bash in there, and then proceed on. Type ls. You basically want to find this library. So far, we found it in different, like you might have to cd ... You can kind of see it's installing a number of different libraries. It has a few different libraries for me, but the one I want is this LangChain one. Okay. And what I think is going on is these libraries are in the image. Like when it built the image, it built it with these, and you can cd into the LangChain one if you need to. And now this is the library that's, as we know, bind mounted, right? Bind mounted into workspaces, LangChain. And any changes I make here will be immediately reflected here. Okay? So now you can go to libs. Actually, I can go back here if I want. Community. Here's my make file again. I can just read it from here. It's the same thing. And then just do like poetry run pytest if you want. No module name after. Why does it keep doing it? I think I have to do it again. I've run into this before. Okay, it's successfully installed, and now I'll run. Yeah, now it's running. Poetry run pytest is running fine. Okay, so this is an alternative way if you're having issues with that dev, whatever this thing is called, the .dev container, right? You can also run it just directly. All right, and the way again we did that was changing the Docker file by adding this command, and I can, I slacked it to you. Doing Docker Compose up, finding Docker Compose up, then do from the same directory, this .dev container directory. Then we basically just do, let me get out of here. Then we just do Docker Compose PS. Why does it say I'm not in there? Because I'm not in I need to be in this dev container folder. So Docker Compose PS. Then I want to bash into this guy, right? Docker exec -it, the name of the service, bash. Then you're basically in. All right, and then you just find your LangChain. I just have to use the right name of the container. It should work, and then you just bash in there, and then you run the rest. Yeah, Julia.
So I guess I'm kind of confused why we actually need to run poetry install again, because the Docker Compose references that like dev.docker file, and in there it says to run poetry install at the bottom.
Right, good question. So I think what's going on is that if you look, so here's where it's running from. Poetry install poetry, my guess is it's running from this folder, and that we have a poetry.lock file in the project directory, and it's running these, or the ones specified here, probably these, and things specified here like LangChain, Sphinx, etc. But then for each specific module here, there's also separately a poetry, these files, and so we need also to, I guess, for this specific module, there might be some extra libraries that you'll have to install. Cool.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, if you can get this working with, like, the dev container, all the better. Like, that's fine. But the point is, I wanted to show you, like, if it doesn't work, here you have a workaround where you basically do the Docker Compose up, and I can help you with this too, or you can, ask your pair as well. But now you do have this workaround where hopefully you can keep going and still work in your local environment. Okay. We just have to make sure we know what the right name of the container is. I think it's just this. Cool. And then from there, just keep going, move on to the next lesson and work through the fix, right, that I kind of moved you through. And then I'll deploy this too. You can start looking at this if you got this far. And feel free, raise your hand or Slack me or Wayne if you are running into issues with setup. Do try, even